Hey everybody, Pastor Nick here. Hope you're having a great day today. Wanted to take a little time and respond to more questions that we've been receiving in class. Please don't be shy. Keep sending the questions in. I love the interactions. We are getting some good questions. I'm finding that people are often very intrigued by the end times aspects of the things that we've been talking about. And we will later in the course be looking at the end times prophecies a little bit more in depth. So I received a question about the prophecy of the weeks in Daniel chapter 9 and the timing issues that are there. So just to recap, if you weren't with us, you'll perhaps know, and if not, I encourage you to go back and find the video where we've talked about that. In Daniel chapter 9, Daniel the prophet is praying and he is confessing the sins of his people to God. And the angel Gabriel appears, and Gabriel lays out for Daniel the future course of Israel's history. And it has to do with cycles of years leading up to the coming of the Messiah, his first coming. So this person noted a time frame in American history which seemed interesting and asked me if there might be a connection. And I would say the answer to that is no. I don't believe there's any connection that we can draw between what's in Daniel chapter 9 and what is happening in the history of any Gentile nation. Let me read here in Daniel 9, verse 24. Gabriel says to Daniel, 70 weeks are determined for your people and your holy city. And then he lists several things, several purposes that Israel has, or that God is going to be doing through Israel in that time frame. So those 70 weeks of years, 490 years, pertain to Israel. They pertain to God's dealings with Israel. Doesn't mean that God is not also at the same time working in the church, or that he's not at the same time working in the various Gentile nations of the world, but it really has nothing to do with America or any Gentile nation that we can identify. And this kind of brings into play a bigger question. We have to remember when we're reading the scripture, and especially when we're reading the Old Testament, that the Bible is Israel-centric. It doesn't mean that God doesn't love the nations. It doesn't mean that God doesn't have purposes for the nations. But the Bible is Israel-centric, and a great majority of the prophecies, I believe, in the Old Testament are relating to God's purposes for the people of Israel. It is a Israel-centered book. It is a Jerusalem-centered book. It concerns primarily God's dealings with his ancient people, Israel. I know a lot of times it's very common when we're looking at Old Testament scriptures concerning the end times, or New Testament scriptures concerning the end times, that people want to say, well, where is America? You know, I believe that these nations are Rome, or these nations are Muslim nations, or whatever it is, but where is America? And the answer is we simply don't know. People who study these things and write and speak about prophetic scripture in great detail and with great learning would tell you that there's only the barest of references that people might be able to spin something out of to say that that's a reference to America. For the lifetime of most people, America has been the leading power in the world. Not that it hasn't had its challengers, but I would say that the baton of world leadership, if you want to use a phrase like that, passed from the British Empire to the United States during World War I, or in the aftermath of World War I, and that's already over 100 years ago, right? World War I ended in 1918, and I think it's fair to say that since that time, America has been the leading nation in the world. So it may have some challengers Now China may be a challenger, okay, but um, we can't assume from that that the United States will be referred to in the Bible. There have been other great powers or empires besides us, and I can guarantee you that in centuries past, people wanted to look into the scripture and find themselves in the scripture, whether it was the British Empire, the French Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. All of these entities at one time were, let's say, riding high, right? If we go back a few centuries, the Spanish Empire was the leading empire, and its money was used all over the world, even in China, right? So that's a similar situation to what we have today, but there's no guarantee, if the Lord should tarry another 100 years, there's no guarantee that we will still be the leading power in the world. It may be China, it may be some grouping of nations that we're not even aware of yet. And wars and politics can often change the map. I mean, pick a century, any century you like, and the map of Europe, for example, is always changing. So I'm saying all that not because I want to get lost in the weeds in a history lesson, but just to say that conditions on the ground here on planet Earth are always changing. And so what we cannot do out of patriotism or any other reason, we cannot read America and America's concerns into the Bible where America simply is not present. The drama of the end of the age occurs in the Middle East. It occurs relative to Israel and Israel's surrounding neighbors, many of whom are mentioned either by names that we would recognize or names that would have been recognized in the time of the prophets. Okay, so you look at the book of Ezekiel, he's listing nations and regions which made sense to him. They don't make a lot of sense to us, but scholars can look at a map and say, okay, this is what is now Turkey, this is what is now Syria, and so on. We can't read into those descriptions of nations and say, oh, that's America, oh, that's Britain, oh, that's China, whatever. I believe the safest rules of biblical interpretation would guide us to say we need to read those things not by what we are imagining they meant, but by what it meant to Ezekiel when he wrote it, for example. So again, just to kind of tie a bow on this, the Bible is an Israel-centered book. Doesn't mean that God doesn't love people who are not Israelites, obviously. God so loved the world, right, that he gave his only begotten son. But in terms of the political situation and in terms of the historical situation, the Bible's focus, the Bible's center point is Israel and Jerusalem and what's happening there. So all of that to say, we don't see, I believe, America or any other nation in Daniel chapter 9 in any of the cycles of history, whether you are into studying economic cycles or fourth turnings or any of those things that people study in the business world and the political science worlds, has really nothing to do with Daniel 9. It's Israel-centered. So thanks for that. More videos to come, and keep sending in your questions. Take care.